Kodak Black might be the most arrested rapper in modern history, and that's not even an exaggeration. From sexual assault charges to federal weapons convictions to drug trafficking, this man has seen the inside of more courtrooms than most lawyers. So today we're breaking down every single time Kodak Black has been arrested and everything that actually happened, starting with the one that almost buried him for good, 2016 South Carolina. In February 2016, Kodak Black was charged with first-degree criminal sexual conduct in Florence County, South Carolina. That's a felony that carries up to 30 years in prison. 30, not 5, not 10, 30 years behind bars for a rapper whose career was just starting to blow up nationally. The allegation came from a high school student who said Kodak assaulted her in a hotel room after a performance in Florence. The arrest warrant described repeated resistance by the alleged victim, and the local solicitor's office made it clear they were treating this as a serious prosecution. But here's the thing, the case didn't go to trial for years. Not because prosecutors lost interest, but because Kodak kept getting arrested in other states. Florida had him on weapons charges. Then the feds picked him up. South Carolina literally couldn't get him into a courtroom because other jurisdictions kept snatching him first. So they filed a detainer, basically a legal leash, that said the second federal prison was done with him. South Carolina gets him next. Then in April 2021, after 5 years of legal limbo, the case ended. Not with a trial, with a plea deal. Kodak pleaded guilty to first-degree assault and battery, a lesser charge, and received 18 months of probation, 0 prison time, no sex offender registration. A charge that once threatened 30 years, quietly dissolved into probation and a handshake. Fans say the plea proves it was overblown. Critics say plea deals in sexual assault cases almost always protect the accused, not the accuser. Either way, this case set the tone for everything that followed. Because if you think this was heavy, wait until you hear what happened at Rolling Loud. Picture this. One of the biggest rappers in the country is about to walk on stage at Rolling Loud Miami. Thousands of fans waiting, and instead of grabbing a microphone, he gets grabbed by federal agents. A TF, US Marshals, Miami-Dade Police, the whole squad. And the wildest part, they weren't there because he shot somebody. They were there because of a checkbox on a government form. Let me explain. 2019 federal arrest. On May 11th, 2019, Kodak Black was arrested right outside Rolling Loud in a joint federal operation. A TF agents, US, Marshals, Miami-Dade Police, all coordinated specifically to grab him before he hit the stage. The charge wasn't gun possession, it was something way more specific and honestly way more bureaucratic. Back in January and March of 2019, Kodak walked into a gun shop in Hialeah and filled out ATF Form 4473, the federal background check form you complete before buying a firearm. One of the questions asks whether you're currently under indictment for a felony. He was. He checked no anyway, twice. He successfully bought 3 firearms, a 9mm handgun, a .380 caliber handgun, and a semi-automatic Mini Draco, which is basically a compact AK variant that looks exactly as aggressive as it sounds. And here's where it gets worse. At least one of those guns was later found at the scene of a completely unrelated shooting. He wasn't charged with that shooting, but a gun he illegally obtained ending up at a crime scene is, not ideal. After the arrest, prosecutors argued he was a flight risk, got his bond revoked, and he sat in a federal facility all summer. The theoretical maximum? Up to 20 years across counts, 20 years for paperwork. In August 2019, he flipped his plea and admitted guilt to 2 counts of making false statements to acquire firearms. Then in November, he was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised release, almost 4 years behind bars, and arguably the most serious legal consequence any mainstream rapper had faced in years. The whole thing carries this bizarre irony. Here's an artist whose entire brand is built on street credibility and firearms, and the thing that actually put him in a federal cell wasn't pulling a trigger, it was lying on a form. A government checkbox took down Kodak Black. But if you think federal prison was the end of this story, wait until you hear how he got out. January 19th, 2021, the literal last day of the Trump presidency, and somewhere on a list of over 100 clemency actions, sandwiched between political allies and white-collar criminals, is the name Bilkahan Capri, better known as Kodak Black, right next to Lil Wayne, because that's a normal sentence to say. 2021, Donald Trump sentence commutation. Here's the thing about this moment, it's not a courtroom story or a police story, it's the bizarre, almost surreal collision of hip-hop culture and White House politics, happening in the final hours of a presidency while the rest of the country was watching an entirely different kind of chaos unfold. So let's get the legal distinction out of the way, because almost everybody gets this wrong. Trump did not pardon Kodak Black, he commuted his sentence. A pardon wipes the conviction. A commutation just shortens the punishment. So, Kodak walked out of federal prison early, yes, but his felony felony conviction for lying on those ATF forms still on the books. His 3 years of supervised release still active. Every future courtroom appearance, that federal firearms conviction follows him into the room and sits down next to him. The White House called him a prominent artist and community leader, pointing to donations he'd made to families of slain FBI agents, children's education programs, disaster relief efforts. And to be fair, those donations were real, but thousands of non-famous federal prisoners sitting on brutal sentences for non-violent offenses got absolutely nothing that day, while Kodak and Lil Wayne made the list, which is, not ideal if you're trying to argue the process is principled. Meanwhile, South Carolina prosecutors immediately clarified something important. Trump's clemency, zero effect on their pending sexual conduct case. Presidential clemency only covers federal offenses. State charges are a completely separate universe, but here's where it gets dark in a way nobody really talks about. The commutation didn't just free Kodak Black, it put him back on the street with years of supervised release ahead of him. If he'd served the full 46 months, the 2022 oxycodone arrest never happens. The 2023 probation violation never happens. Every single legal disaster that followed was only possible because he was out early. Trump's act of mercy basically reset the clock on a whole new cycle of trouble, and that cycle started fast, because less than 2 years after walking out of federal prison, Kodak Black found himself staring down a trafficking charge that made the gun case look simple. It starts with window tint. On July 15, 2022, Florida Highway Patrol troopers pulled over Kodak Black's SUV in Fort Lauderdale because the windows looked too dark and the tag wasn't properly displayed. Two of the most boring traffic violations imaginable. The kind of thing that ends with a fix-it ticket and a have a nice day. 2022 oxycodone trafficking arrest. But this is Kodak Black, so naturally, it did not end that way. During the stop, troopers discovered his license was expired. His registration was also expired. So the man is driving around Fort Lauderdale in a vehicle that is, legally speaking, a suggestion. Then they searched the car. Inside, officers found 31 oxycodone tablets and approximately $75,000 in cash, which is, not ideal. Here's where it gets serious. Under Florida law, oxycodone trafficking is based on weight, not whether you sold anything. If you possess pills in the 15 to 25 gram range, that's an automatic mandatory minimum of 7 years and a $100,000 fine. No proof of sale required. 31 pills cleared that threshold. He was charged with trafficking in oxycodone, booked into Broward County Jail, and later released on bond. But here's the kicker. He was still on federal supervised release from his 2019 gun conviction. So this new arrest didn't just create a state case. It immediately opened the door for federal revocation proceedings on top of everything else. Two systems, both watching. Now there's a detail that has caused an unbelievable amount of confusion online. In December 2023, Kodak was stopped again, and officers found a substance that field tested as cocaine. His attorney later proved through lab results it was actually oxycodone, and he had a valid prescription. That charge was dropped. Great. But fans ran with that and decided all the oxycodone charges were gone. They were not. The December 2023 dismissal was a completely separate incident from the July 2022 trafficking case. The 31 pills and the $75,000 in cash, that one remained active. The debate split into two camps. Fans argued the stop was pretextual and that $75,000 is normal for a touring artist. Critics countered that being a convicted felon on federal supervision, driving with expired everything, carrying opioids and enough cash to buy a mid-sized sedan was maybe not the smartest Tuesday afternoon a person could have. Both sides have a point, but only one side was facing a 7-year mandatory minimum. But if the trafficking charge wasn't enough pressure, wait until you hear what happened when he started failing drug tests. 2023 probation violation. So while Kodak is sitting there awaiting trial on the oxycodone trafficking case from 2022, he does two things that make his legal situation significantly worse. He misses a required drug test, and then when he does take one, he tests positive for fentanyl. Not oxycodone, not weed, fentanyl, which is, not ideal. The court's response was exactly what you'd expect. They jailed him. Here's the thing about supervised release violations. A judge doesn't need a new trial, doesn't need a jury. They can just send you back to prison based on noncompliance alone. Kodak was genuinely staring down the barrel of going right back inside without ever being convicted of anything new. But then something genuinely surreal happened. The judge agreed to let him perform at Rolling Loud before checking into court-ordered inpatient rehab. A federal judge looked at the calendar, looked at the festival lineup, and said, yeah, go do your set, then report to rehab. If you ever wanted a single image that captures everything bizarre about celebrity justice in America, it's a judge scheduling addiction treatment around a music festival. I don't know what to tell you. The court ultimately ordered 30 days of inpatient drug rehabilitation, house arrest, and an ankle monitor, not prison, treatment, which, depending on your perspective, is either the system finally responding to addiction like a medical issue or a famous person getting flexibility that Cornelius from Broward County would never see in a million years. Probably both, but 2023 wasn't done with him. In December, he got arrested again after officers found a substance that field tested as cocaine. The lab came back and confirmed it was oxycodone. His attorney proved he had a valid prescription and the possession charge got dropped. Cool, but the arrest itself triggered a separate federal probation violation proceeding, because when you're on supervised release, getting arrested at all is a problem, regardless of whether the charges stick. He sat in federal detention while a judge reviewed the full picture, the positive fentanyl test, the missed appointment, the December arrest. In February 2024, the judge sentenced him to time served and let him walk. Not exonerated, not cleared, just you've sat here long enough. The whole episode raises a question nobody has a clean answer to. Is this about a man struggling with addiction inside a system that doesn't know whether to punish or treat him, or a celebrity consistently getting breaks regular defendants can't dream of? The honest answer is both, happening at the same time in the same courtroom. But if you think the legal trouble was winding down after all that, wait until you hear about the MDMA trafficking charge. By this point, you'd think we'd be running out of new ways for Kodak Black to end up in a jail booking photo. You would be wrong. On May 6, 2025, Bill Capri turned himself in at the Orange County Jail in Central Florida on a felony charge of trafficking in MDMA. Not oxycodone, not fentanyl, MDMA. A completely different substance, a completely different jurisdiction, and a completely different investigation from everything we just talked about. Because apparently one active drug trafficking case at a time just isn't enough. 2025 Orange County MDMA trafficking arrest. Here's what makes this one stand out from the pile. This wasn't a traffic stop gone sideways. The charge came out of an investigation by Orlando police, meaning law enforcement had been building this case for months before they ever filed a warrant. That's not a coincidence arrest. That's deliberate. The alleged weight range was between 14 and 200 grams. Under Florida law, that's a mid-level trafficking bracket, not simple possession where you could maybe argue personal use and hope for the best. It's the kind of range that says the state thinks you were moving product and they're prepared to prove it. And the geography here matters. Almost every major Kodak Black legal disaster we've covered happened in South Florida or South Carolina, his turf. But Orlando, that's Central Florida. A completely different law enforcement apparatus deciding independently that he's worth investigating. That suggests the scrutiny around him has expanded well beyond Broward and Miami-Dade, which is not a great development if you're his defense attorney. At his initial court appearance, prosecutors cited his extensive criminal history, specifically the 2019 federal firearms conviction, and pushed for strict bond conditions. The judge set bond at $75,000. Split the difference, basically. Now here's where people online keep getting confused. This MDMA case is not the oxycodone case with a new coat of paint. Different drug, different county, different alleged conduct. But because Kodak has been arrested for drug offenses so many times, fans have started treating his legal history like one continuous blurry event rather than separate cases with separate potential sentences, which is a problem. Oxycodone trafficking case was still unresolved at the time, meaning he was now carrying multiple active felony drug trafficking charges across different Florida counties simultaneously. The full details of the investigation, whether it involved undercover buys, informants, or surveillance, weren't fully public at the time of reporting. What we do know is that Orlando police spent enough time on this to build a case, file for a warrant, and wait for him to surrender. That's not nothing. But if you think walking into one county jail on a trafficking charge is where the month of May ends for Kodak Black, I have some unfortunate news about what happened 8 days later in Broward County. 8 days. That's how long it took for Kodak Black to go from one county jail to another. On May 6th, 2025, he's booked in Orange County for MDMA trafficking. On May 14th, he's walking into Broward County's main jail on completely different charges. At this point, the man's mugshot collection has its own cinematic universe. 2025 Broward County fleeing and eluding arrest. Here's here's what happened. On February 27, 2025, Broward Sheriff's Office deputies tried to pull Kodak over during a routine traffic stop. He allegedly did not stop. The resulting charges: attempting to flee or elude law enforcement, a potential third-degree felony, and resisting an officer without violence, a misdemeanor. Not exactly the heavyweight legal trouble he's used to. But here's the weird part. That February incident didn't result in an immediate arrest. 3 full months passed before deputies came to collect him on a warrant, which raises an obvious question: what did this pursuit actually look like? If he outran them, how'd they identify him? If they identified him on scene, why not arrest him right there? The Gap suggests this wasn't some high-speed chase through downtown Fort Lauderdale. More likely, deputies noted his plates, filed paperwork, and waited, which is, not exactly a cinematic police pursuit. Bond was set at $3,500. His MDMA trafficking bond 8 days earlier was $75,000. This one cost less than a decent used couch. He posted it and walked out the next day, news cameras catching the whole thing outside Broward County Main Jail, because at this point, the local crews probably have a dedicated Kodak Black desk. On its own, this case is a footnote. A fleeing charge next to federal gun convictions and drug trafficking allegations is like getting a parking ticket during a building fire, but it doesn't exist in isolation. Stack this on top of the MDMA trafficking arrest 8 days earlier. Stack that on top of a still open 2022 oxycodone trafficking case. Stack that on top of a probation violation, a rehab order, a presidential commutation, a federal prison sentence, and a sexual conduct plea tracing back to a South Carolina hotel room in 2016. Suddenly, this little fleeing charge isn't just a footnote. It's the latest entry in a pattern that prosecutors can point to every single time they argue flight risk at a bond hearing. For a defendant already on supervision with a record this long, running from deputies, even allegedly, carries weight far beyond the charge itself. And that's really the story of Kodak Black's entire legal history in miniature. Substance-related arrests stacking on top of each other, supervision violations, a legal system that has alternated between throwing him in federal prison and letting him perform at Rolling Loud before reporting to rehab. From Florence County in 2016 to 2 separate Florida jail bookings in the same week nearly a decade later, the cycle hasn't broken. It's just gotten faster. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.